Here is my story. I met my wife, Catherine, in high school. We met a day before prom night. Neither of us had dates, so we decided to go together. She was the most beautiful girl I had ever met. That's where we hit it off. We dated for 5 years before getting married at a young age. My wife had a drinking problem, and she was once caught up in a drink and drive case, but I took care of her, and she recovered. We were always the so-in-love couple in our family and friends. 1 year into our marriage, we welcomed our boy, Adam. We were a complete family, everything I ever wished for. The only thing lacking in our life was that I didn't earn well. I worked at a government organization. Although it didn't affect me, my wife sometimes complained about not having good things. She wanted me to take bribes and be rich overnight, but it wasn't the life I wanted. My wife was from a middle-class family, but she liked expensive things. She was beautiful. She knew it and was proud of it. She had a huge social circle of rich friends. She often went to their parties wearing borrowed clothes or clothes she bought from expensive shops that she would return the next day. She was a wannabe. Nevertheless, I loved her with all my heart, and she loved me too until one day I took my wife to an office party. We got ready, and instead of going by the tube, my wife insisted we call an Uberlux. We obviously couldn't afford an Uberlux because of its high prices. My wife argued that the dress she bought would get ruined if she wore it on the tube, and she wouldn't be able to return it. She became upset, and this wasn't what I wanted. So I convinced her we could order an Uber ride instead of an Uberlux. When the car arrived, my wife seemed irritated. She told me I would be cheap forever. I tried to cheer her up on the way, but she remained frustrated. My wife suddenly held my hand and laughed as we entered the party. It was one of the things I didn't like about her. Her fake laugh. It irritated the hell out of me, but I still tolerated it because I loved my wife. She was stunned by how fancy the party was. There was expensive wine and dishes everywhere. My wife had a few drinks, and I stopped her before she could have any more and get out of control. She had a drinking problem since she was a teenager and was once charged with a drink and drive case. My wife pointed out how luxurious the dresses of other women were. She started complaining about her dress, and I told her she was the most beautiful woman at the party. My wife wasn't impressed by my compliment. My wife wanted to go home, but I told her to wait a little longer as I wanted her to meet my boss. She wasn't interested, but I insisted, and she decided to stay. I saw that my boss was free, so I took my wife to meet him. My boss James is usually dry, but he was surprisingly happy when he saw me and my wife. It was a little weird, but I thought it might be because it was a special occasion. He greeted me and my wife and started talking. He joked that he didn't know I had such a beautiful wife. I counted it as a compliment, and my wife was pleased. She loved being praised. We three were talking when one of my coworkers called me. I excused myself and went to meet him. After a while, when I came back, my wife told me she invited my boss to dinner tomorrow. I was glad about it. It was a good gesture. The next day, my wife got up early and started cleaning the house. It was nothing out of the ordinary. My wife came from the dressing room wearing a deep neck dress that I bought for her for our anniversary, which was next week. I asked her why she wore the anniversary dress today and that it was a little revealing. She sounded irritated, told me this was more important than our anniversary, and told me not to be so conservative. She said a rich man was coming to our house, which could bring many opportunities. At dinner time, my boss came with gifts. My wife served us dinner, and after that, my boss took one of the gifts out and opened it. It was a locket for my wife. My wife was overjoyed. She thanked him and instantly took off the locket I gave her on her birthday and wore that locket. I felt sad that my wife preferred an expensive locket over the locket I gave her. My boss brought a watch for me too, and thus it wasn't suspicious that he got an expensive gift for her. After my boss went home, my wife was all praises about him. I agreed that he was very generous. My wife was always around our son during the daytime and only went out when I was home to care for him. On our anniversary day, I came home early to surprise my wife. When I entered my house, I saw that nobody was home. I thought my wife and son had gone to the park or something. I sat down to drink a glass of water when the bell rang. I thought it was my wife and son, but when I opened the door, it was my neighbor with my son. She said that she had to go somewhere, so she had to bring him back. I didn't know why he was at my neighbor's house in the first place and where my wife was. After thanking the neighbor for having him, I closed the door and asked my son what was happening. He told me that my wife was going out for a few days and leaving him with the neighbor. It was a little suspicious. When my wife came home, I asked her about this, and she replied that she was planning a surprise for our anniversary. I was revealed and asked her what the surprise was. She seemed a little irritated and told me it was dinner. We both got ready and went for dinner. I was shocked to see that it was one of the most expensive restaurants in the city. I told my wife we couldn't afford this, but she hissed at me not to create a scene here. I silently went in with her. My wife went in and asked the receptionist for a table of 2 under the name Catherine. The receptionist reconfirmed that it was Catherine and James. My wife started acting a little weird. She was irritated and said it was under Catherine and John. The receptionist checked and told us there was no reservation for Catherine and John. My wife went out hissing about how bad the customer service was without saying another word. I told my wife it was okay and we ate dinner at a local restaurant. My wife didn't say a word during it. A few days passed and my boss started visiting my cabin often. He seemed to be happy with my work. One day he called me into his cabin and told me he wanted to invite me to dinner at his house on Sunday. I was surprised because my boss had never invited anyone to his house. I accepted his invitation. When I told my wife about the invitation, she became really happy. She seemed as if Cinderella was invited to the ball only if I could understand. It was finally Sunday and my wife and I got ready. My wife insisted that we don't take our son because he might break anything. I wanted to take him and go as a family, but my wife argued. So I gave up and asked a neighbor to take care of our son because I couldn't afford a nanny. Upon arriving at his house, my wife got out of the car and started walking. When I tried to hold her hand, she brushed me off. I thought that she was upset about the anniversary dinner. My boss warmly welcomed us. My wife and my boss talked through the dinner. I was a little quiet because I'm an introvert, but this behavior wasn't unusual because my wife is an extrovert. During the dinner, I got a call from my mother. I couldn't hear her, so I went to talk to my mother. It took me a while, and when I returned, I saw my boss's hand on my wife's face. I stood there shocked. Then my boss looked at me and said my wife had something in her eye. He said it so casually that I had no reason to doubt it. After the dinner, my boss offered my wife a job at our office. He said that she was the right person to be his assistant. My wife agreed to it. It was a little weird because my wife had never wanted to work. My wife started working at the office and we put our son in a daycare. I was happy to see my wife at work, but she usually ignored me. I thought it was because of work, as she has never worked. A few weeks passed and my boss promoted me. I was happy with my promotion, but it meant that I had to be in another office. For the first few days I used to come to pick up my wife, but then she insisted she would go home by herself. One day I decided to take my wife out for lunch during lunch break. I went to her office, but she wasn't there. When I asked the senior assistant where my wife was, she told me that my wife had gone out with my boss. I called her, but she didn't respond. I asked the senior assistant if they attended a meeting, but she said there was no meeting. Out of nowhere I remembered that we both usually keep our location on so the other one knows. It was my wife's idea. I checked her location and it showed that she was at my boss's house. I got a little suspicious. I went there, but the security didn't let me in. I told them to call my wife, and after several minutes she came out and looked at me as if she had seen a ghost. I asked her what she was doing there. She told me that some paperwork needed to be done. I then noticed that a few buttons on her shirt were unbuttoned, and at that moment I knew that my wife was cheating on me. I told her we needed to go home and she followed me. On our way home I kept thinking about everything that had happened, and it all made sense now. She told me she had to go to a meeting with our boss out of the city today. I wanted to lash at her, but I had other plans. I wanted revenge. I kept calm and said it was okay and that I would take care of our son. When we went home, my wife went straight to the washroom. I wanted to confront and shame her, but before I could do that, I wanted revenge. I took her phone and typed in the PIN. To my surprise, my wife hadn't changed the PIN. I quickly looked at her messages and saw that she was texting my boss. I took screenshots of their texts and then quickly sent them to me. I then deleted my chat from her phone. Out of curiosity, I scrolled and discovered they had intimate photos together. I wonder how long all of this has been happening. Rage overpowered me. I also sent myself those photos and threw my wife's phone on the wall. She came out of the washroom and I lashed out at her. I confronted her and she started pleading, but I pushed her away. I told her she'll now know what it feels like to be broke. I stormed out, drove straight to the office and showed HR the evidence of their affair. The company had strict rules, so they instantly took action. I was given a bonus for getting them caught. The company fired them and I filed for divorce. In court, my wife tried to get custody of our son, but I had evidence that she had a drinking problem, and thus the court decided in my favor and I got my son's custody. However, my wife was allowed to meet him on weekends under my supervision. My son said he was glad to be with me because his mother avoided him and never listened. I was furious at her. She was indulged in lust that she ignored her child, my son. But things got better and me and my son lived together happily. Few months passed and I dedicated all my attention to work. I got a promotion and was now at my boss's position. I had everything he had and what my wife wanted. Somehow my wife came to know about this. When she came to meet our son on weekends, she tried to seduce and win me over, but I was done with her games. My wife lost all her friends and now lives in a shabby apartment and couldn't get a decent job because of her previous records. First of all, I want to say that you didn't deserve what happened to you. Even if you are not rich, I think you have a heart of gold. You tried to please your wife, but she was never happy. She seems to be an ungrateful woman who will never be satisfied. You should have known that she was cheating on you when she made that reservation, but as it said, love is blind. Your revenge was epic. She deserved to be thrown back into her darkness. Thank you for sharing this great story with us. I wish you all the best going forward. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's story. My wife, 34, and I, 32, have been together for 8 years. When she told me about the business trick she was planning on taking, I thought it was a little odd because she worked as a bank teller. But she actually showed me a company email she got, explaining that all employees were to receive paid training over the course of 1 weekend in Tennessee. What she forgot to do, though, was turn off location share on her phone, which led me to discover that she was actually at a bar. So you can imagine how surprised I was to see her at the bar, sitting with another man. I watched them drink a lot over the course of 3 hours from the opposite side of the restaurant. I told my closest friend that I saw my wife was there, even though she was supposed to be on a business trip. He was shocked and asked me what I was going to do. I decided to start filming. I was super upset when I caught a kiss on video. My friend tried to console me, but nothing was going to help at that moment. Eventually, they left, and I followed them at a distance. My wife got in the driver's seat of the man's car, leaving hers at the bar. I didn't like this at all. It was super unsettling. As I watched her drive, she had trouble staying on the road. I decided to call the cops on her and gave them the license plate of the man's car. I followed them from a distance of about half a mile on the highway before a cop found them. She was swerving pretty badly, even more than when I called them. I then saw her get pulled over before going around them. I was so pleased. With what I knew at this point, my wife had some consequences due. I then drove off to a secluded area and sat there thinking about what happened until I got a phone call. It was my wife, calling from the police station. She asked me to bear with her while she told me one hell of a story. She said her business trip was canceled, so she went to the bar with her friends before coming home. She said her car was left at the bar because her friend was driving her home. That's when she stopped, realizing she made a mistake in her story. She was being charged with a DUI and needed me to bail her out, but she just accidentally told me her friend was driving her home. If that was the case, she wouldn't be charged with a DUI. Besides that, she probably knew I was going to ask where her friend was. In her absolute frustration, she hung up on me. I didn't even get a chance to ask her anything. I found out later that she called her dad before calling me back. Apparently, she got lots of phone calls from jail. The only reason she called me back was because her dad refused to bail her out. She said she had to tell me the truth, but hoped I would hear her out and be understanding. She said she was driving her friend home when she got pulled over and arrested for a DUI. After my initial freak out over the news, I asked her who her friend was and how she planned to get home if her friend was too drunk to drive. She said she was going to spend time there, maybe sleepover while she sobered up. Okay, but who was her friend? She only gave me the name of Sarah. She said she didn't know her last name. How silly. I warned her that if I was going to bail her out, I was going to ask the police who she was with when she was arrested. This stunned her, and she probably wondered if the police would tell me that information. At this point, she was in a corner, so she agreed and begged me to come get her. I said I would but didn't. I called her company to speak with her boss. I asked if they canceled an employee training seminar scheduled for this weekend in Tennessee, but she had no idea what I was talking about. I thanked her for her time, but before I got off the phone, I let her know that my wife was being charged with a DUI and served divorce papers, so she probably wouldn't be into work for a while. She would have a lot to explain to her boss and coworkers if she wasn't fired. I couldn't bail her out. I had to let her pay the price for her foolishness. She lied to my face and created a fake company email to show me. I never would have known she was with another man if I didn't go to the same bar by chance. I had a video of them kissing, and along with her arrest, it was the perfect time to file for divorce. When she was pulled over, she was in his car and driving toward his home. She must have planned to spend the whole weekend with him, since that's what she fabricated the lie for. That proves to me that she was going to sleep with him repeatedly, or already has. She was absolutely broken when she was released. She tried to rekindle the relationship with the man in question, but he wasn't interested anymore. Pretty pathetic if you ask me. She gave up our 8-year-long relationship for someone who didn't want her after 3 months. Sometimes I wish this was all a bad dream and she really did go on a business trip. She's actually told me on a voicemail that she wishes the same thing. Meanwhile, I'm still happy she got a DUI and caught in the epic way she was. I can't imagine what would have happened if I never found her that night. I might have avoided raising a bastard child. For that reason alone, I am grateful. Opie, I am sorry you had to experience the shock and betrayal of finding your wife at a bar with another man. You thought you could trust her and she was where she said she was. That proved to be false, which leads me to believe you made the right decision to divorce. It would have only been a matter of time before she tried to sneak away again. She didn't seem remorseful beyond the fact that she was caught. When someone goes as far as forging evidence to prove their lie is trustworthy, that is a red flag. I have hope for you, OP. You seem like a strong and wise individual who won't have much of a problem moving on from this. You were very clever to call the police on her for drunk driving. Not only was she disrespecting you and cheating, she was putting other people's lives at risk. I hope she's learned her lesson, and I wish nothing but the very best going forward. Now let's get into today's second story. I'm about to tell you one messed up story that I can't believe happened to me. First, let's start off with some background information. I had a really big family with lots of siblings, uncles, aunts, cousins, and spouses and offspring of those relatives. We had lots of family gatherings and big dinners. Ever since we started dating, I would bring Laylee, my girlfriend then wife, to lots of social family events. I was 34 and Laylee, my future wife, was 31 when I proposed. In my parents' opinion, I made them wait a very long time for this to happen. So when we got engaged, they hosted a really big engagement party with all my relatives in attendance. Laylee didn't have any family. At first, it was hard for me to believe, but she really didn't have any family. She had foster parents that moved away as soon as she turned 18 and started living on her own. Before I proposed, I warned Laylee that I could not have children of my own. I became a cancer survivor by the age of 14, and infertility was one of the consequences from that. She told me she didn't mind and we would adopt if we ever wished to have children. The engagement party was a huge success. It was a wonderful night for both of us, surrounded by friends and my, now supposedly our, family. I was so relieved to have found the woman I wanted to spend my life with. 1 month after our engagement party, I got the greatest surprise of my life. Laylee told me she was pregnant. I was ecstatic. I didn't know how it was possible. I only accepted it as a miracle. I called my parents and told them right away. I had to move the phone away from my ear because of their excited screams. It came as no surprise when my parents couldn't contain their excitement anymore and sent out invites to a baby shower. When we looked at the invites my mom designed, my fiancé looked disheartened. She blamed it on pregnancy hormones, but I could have sworn she felt shame or embarrassment. I couldn't imagine why, and I tried to ask if this was the case, but she assured me she was fine. During the party, I was on cloud 9. I was practically high on life and becoming a father, so I didn't realize my fiancé was gone for a bit. My younger brother pulled me aside and told me I needed to see my fiancé. I was immediately concerned. We went upstairs and stopped just outside the spare bedroom door. I could hear her crying and softly speaking to someone. Another man. This man, I quickly realized, sounded exactly like my older brother. I looked at my younger brother, Tommy, with my jaw dropped as I listened, completely stunned. His expression seemed to acknowledge that he knew the man in the bedroom with my fiancé was our oldest brother, Louis. Louis was furious. He was calling Lily names, telling her that she should have taken Plan B or had an abortion instead of telling me she was pregnant. He said they were in one hell of a mess because of her stupidity. He offered the reasoning that since they couldn't tell anyone the baby was his, maybe she could fall down the stairs or do something to Miss Gary. Lily was the first one to come out, and we stared at each other. Louis came out shortly after, hopefully not planning to push Lily down the stairs, and froze when he saw us. I was having an out-of-body experience when I attacked my brother. I don't remember the moments I was beating him, but I do remember when 5 of my family members pulled me off of him. That's when I realized there was lots of yelling and crying. Lots of questions and accusations. I looked Lily in the eyes through all the people crowding the hallway when I announced that the wedding was off. I stumbled down the stairs, so Tommy came to my side and drove me to his apartment. Apparently, the mass chaos took a while to simmer down after I left. Since I discovered them and the secret was out, Louis announced that he was the father of Lily's child. Everyone gasped. Some people cried. Many of my cousins started yelling at Louis, getting in his face and calling him out for being so self-centered and inconsiderate. Louis didn't feel remorse for what he'd done, only that he was caught. In his mind, this was Lily's problem because she didn't take care of it. Since he found all of the family criticism less than desirable, he left. He found a woman to stay with in the next stayover. While I grieved, my family members took turns staying with me at my house for having me stay with them at their house. My dream of getting married and having a child was gone just as quickly as it appeared. But in that short amount of time, I had invested so much hope and energy. I felt drained and discouraged, but apparently, this was nothing compared to what Lily was going through. Immediately after the hellish baby shower, she found herself homeless. Without me or my family's support, she was alone. After spending a few days on the streets, she managed to find a room to stay in with a roommate. She continuously messaged me, even though I would rarely reply. I was in recovery mode. It felt like I was in shock for a while after this because I was also coping with the betrayal of my brother. She would ask me to spend time with her because of how badly she wanted companionship, especially as she neared the due date of the baby without any plan or way to support it. I told her no. She needed to handle herself because this was the consequence of her choice. If she needed to, of course, she could put the child up for adoption, but that was not my concern. Wow, OP. Your story just goes to show that cheating never happens without consequences for those involved. Even though your fiancé tried to hide the fact that you were not the father, the truth came out. It's shocking that she would cheat on you with your brother and that your brother would also go behind your back. That's devastating news. It is a relief to hear that, even though you had to go through this level of betrayal, you had lots of family support. I am so glad you discovered the truth. You basically have an opportunity to get your life back. I wish you the best going forward. Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also,